Hello and welcome to the Gaggle where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just wanted to record a short podcast on the arrest and, I should say, abduction of former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. As you may know, the International Criminal Court had been investigating for some time the supposed crimes against humanity committed by Duterte during the years that he was president of the Philippines, 2016 through to 2022. Now, what was very striking about this arrest and kidnapping, first of all, there were two things. First of all, that the Philippines had withdrawn from the Rome Statute. So the Philippines had been a signatory of the Rome Statute. But once they launched this investigation into Duterte in around 2017, 2018, Duterte, made the perfectly reasonable decision that to withdraw from the Rome Statute. And in fact, in 2019, the Philippines withdrew from the Rome Statute. So that's one striking thing. So, in other words, for the Philippines is no longer a party to the Rome Statute. It no longer recognizes the jurisdiction of the ICC. Yet nonetheless, the ICC managed to effect an arrest and an abduction. He was immediately bundled, dumped into a plane and flown to The Hague. So that's one thing. The second thing is, and it flows from that, is that Duterte was given no time, resources, ability to challenge the legal validity of the arrest warrant. And this is a very basic thing that any defendant anywhere not only has the right to counsel, not only has the right to confront his accusers, not only has the right to a speedy trial, he also has a right to challenge the legal basis of any arrest warrant. So if the arrest warrant is full of nonsense, then you can go to the court and declare that this arrest warrant has no legal standing. And given the circumstances here, which is that the Philippines has since 2019, so now for more than 5 years, since 2019, the Philippines has not recognized the jurisdiction of the ICC. And therefore, an arrest warrant issued by the ICC has no legal standing. Now, he didn't get the opportunity. Instead, he was bundled into an aircraft and flown straight out to The Hague. Now, that's very problematic for a number of reasons. I mean, obviously, the fact that he was unable to challenge the legal validity of the arrest warrant, but he's now thousands and thousands of miles away from his home. It's now quite unlikely that he will be released pending trial. And that, again, should be the norm in any legal proceeding, that unless there is very good reason why you should be held in custody, even though you have not been found guilty of a crime, unless there is some sort of good reason, let's say, you're suspected of of being a child molester or whatever. Everybody should be released pending trial, because that is legally enshrines the principle of innocence before guilt. If you haven't been found guilty of anything, you've simply been charged with something. You're waiting to be for your day in court, waiting for the moment when the prosecution is going to try and present its case. Until such a time, you should be able to go about your daily life. But if you're thousands of miles away, your chances of being released pending trial are very slim. You're also very far away from family and friends. You're in a completely different country. The people around you, they're different culture, speaking different languages. And obviously, this is a manifest injustice, particularly in the case of Duterte, who's 79 years old. So really, he's very much in the evening of his life. And so an event like this is clearly very traumatic. This is how the Human Rights Brigade operates. Now, the International Criminal Court, as I pointed out many times here, has no legal standing whatsoever. None of its rulings have any legal standing. It has no jurisprudence that anyone should respect. The ICC has no affiliation with the United Nations. It has no affiliation with the International Court of Justice. Just because it's housed in The Hague, it doesn't have any of the legal grandiosity that comes from The Hague. Well, it's the site of the World Court. It's the site of the Permanent Arbitration Court. No. It has no legal standing. This is something. There's various criminal tribunals that were set up in the 1990s. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. They also did this little 1-2 shuffle that they located themselves in The Hague so that people might think that that they have some kind of affiliation with the United Nations or with the ICJ. The ICC has none of that. The ICC is entirely a voluntary thing. You can accept the Rome Statute and become a party to the Rome Statute, but no one can force you to do so. What the ICC has done is allowed countries to join the ICC and become parties to the Rome Statute so as to use that membership in order to accuse someone else because I'm now a party to the statute, and therefore I can bring some kind of a complaint against somebody else who is carrying out some kind of crimes against me. That's the way it operates. Now, the tribunals, those International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the one about Rwanda, unfortunately had more legal standing than the ICC does because they were actually set up by the UN Security Council. This was at the time when Russia had gone AWOL and just simply signed off on this kind of nonsense, even though they had to have known that the ICTY in particular would be used in a very unfair and vicious way against its great ally in the Balkans, the Serbs. But nonetheless, it was set up by the UN Security Council, and so it had some international legal standing, and so it continued to operate for more than 20 years, by and large, arresting, indicting, prosecuting, convicting, imprisoning Serbs. That's what it did. Now, why does the ICC continue to exist? It continues to exist because of the Human Rights Brigade, who through their sanctimonious posturing, who through their absolutely dishonest, nonsensical claims that somehow, thanks to the ICC, impunity is gone, that somehow leaders will be held accountable for their crimes. They managed to persuade the kind of the very much the liberal pundits, the liberal media, the Guardians, the Politicos, the New York Times, the Washington Post, that somehow the ICC is doing some noble work. But in reality, none of that really happens, because the great powers, every single one of them, United States, China, Russia, India, do not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC. So if the great powers automatically say that the ICC has no legal standing to come after us, then already you can see that, well, this isn't going to be in any way justice. I mean, if the powerful can say, hey, you don't come and threaten us, then this court doesn't have the slightest semblance of justice. And of course, the Human Rights Brigade knows this perfectly well. And they lie and lie by suggesting that, well, this is really just the first step to accountability, and then someday we'll be accountable. No, of course you're not going to be accountable. Of course you're not going to be accountable, because the United States has made clear, not only is it not a party to the Rome Statute, but that if anyone at all, comes after any American serviceman, any American political leader, on the basis of some arrest warrant issued by the ICC, the United States is under obligation to use whatever force is necessary to rescue any American who has been arrested pending an ICC warrant. That's about as strong as you can get to show your absolute contempt for the ICC. And of course, the United States has imposed sanctions against the ICC. When the prosecutor at the time, Fatma Bensouda, threatened to investigate possible war crimes, not even accuse America of any war crimes, but threatened to investigate possible American war crimes in Afghanistan, the Trump administration immediately imposed sanctions against her and against all ICC officials. Now, then we got the do-gooders who bring up the issue of Israel. Oh, great, ICC has indicted Bibi Netanyahu. Isn't it fantastic? Isn't it? What a great thing that is. No, it is not a great thing, because the ICC, whoever it goes after, can go after, the worst person in the world. It still has no legal validity. None. Just because you don't like Bibi Netanyahu doesn't somehow make what the ICC does right. Because, and once you do that, once you celebrate when the ICC issues an arrest warrant against Bibi Netanyahu, then lo and behold, when he comes after you, or comes after leaders that you like, countries that you like, then you don't have a leg to stand on. Because the ICC, then it may go after Bibi Netanyahu, which people clap their hands with glee. Yeah, but it also goes after Vladimir Putin. And that, of course, people don't like. So one should have nothing to do. But with that, but the other thing that's important is that this legal proceeding, or the absence of a legal proceeding, the fact that they were able to abduct Duterte without giving him an opportunity to challenge the arrest warrant, is par for the course for these international tribunals. They're not subject to any kind of jurisdiction. Courts in national jurisdictions can be challenged. And their rulings can be overturned by higher courts, and ultimately even politicians can step in and cancel indictments, cancel arrest warrants, and even politicians can issue pardons or clemency or anything else, because courts are not laws unto themselves. The courts are subject to oversight, like every institution of government is subject to oversight. But when you have these international tribunals, they are not subject to any kind of oversight. So they're just laws unto themselves. They just do whatever the hell they like. So what happened to Duterte is very much like what happened to Slobodan Milosevic. Back in 2001, he was arrested, and he was also bundled into a plane and flown straight to The Hague, to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, immediately dumped into their prison, and then he died 5 years later under very suspicious circumstances. Now, again, he wasn't allowed to challenge the legal validity of the arrest warrant. And it was, as in the case of Duterte, there was very strong grounds for disputing its legal validity. What had happened was that the government in Serbia, led by Zoran Djindjic, had wanted to send him off to The Hague. And he claimed that he had jurisdiction to do this, rather than the federal government of Yugoslavia, which after all has seniority. I mean, that's just the Serbian national government, and this is the federal government. And he said, well, he can just do this. He can just simply make that decision. Yugoslavia's constitutional court had said that you can't make that decision, but in any case, it's going to make a ruling on this, but no one is to do anything until it's made its legal determination. Djindjic didn't bother to wait for the Yugoslavia's constitutional court to make a decision on this question of whether he can just simply send Milosevic off. He just simply bunged him into a plane, and he was flown out. Didn't wait for the Yugoslavia's constitutional court to make a decision. So that was the arrest warrant. And of course, Milosevic, once he was at The Hague, he tried to challenge the validity of the arrest warrant, but his only basis was with the judicial authorities in The Hague. And of course, the ICC said, well, it's nothing to do with us. It's our arrest warrant. We think it's valid. Take it up with the government of Yugoslavia. It's got nothing to do with us. And the same thing is going to happen with the ICC. The ICC is going to say, well, it's nothing to do with us. I mean, if you've got an issue with the way you were treated in Manila, well, that's deal with it with the issue in Manila. But in the meantime, you stay put. You are now under our jurisdiction and in our custody. Naturally, the media clapping their hands with glee, the Human Rights Brigade clapping their hands with glee, and spouting the standard nonsense, like this is the first step to some kind of accountability. Well, of course, it's not the first step to anything, any more than what was done to Milosevic was the first step to anything. And again, we heard the same thing then, the first step to anything, any more than when they indicted the president of Sudan. It wasn't the first step to anything. When they issued an arrest warrant against Putin, it wasn't the first step to anything. They've been doing this kind of nonsense for many years, but you can always rely on the Human Rights Brigade to put forward all their ridiculous assertions, which the media then regurgitate. So let me just show you a couple of typical stories. So first of all, we have the Guardian, and let me just find this is the Guardian. And Duterte's lawyers call for his return to the Philippines after ICC arrest. Daughter accuses government of, quote, kidnapping, unquote, ex-president as victims of war on drugs, express jubilation at arrest. So that's they're jubilant as arrest. Now, this about the victims. This always happens when with these international tribunals. They always talk about, oh, victims' justice. It's all about the victims. But of course, there's no such thing as victims' justice. There is only justice. Because victims' justice is what's known as a lynch mob. And you only listen to the victims, but you don't pay attention to everything else that's essential to justice. Such as due process, appropriate jurisdiction, and appropriate legal proceedings, and jurisprudence that is actually has some kind of consistency with traditional jurisprudence. You don't just simply make up laws as you go along. And then here, lawyers for Rodrigo Duterte have demanded that he be returned to Manila in a petition filed to the Supreme Court as victims of the former Philippine president's bloody war on drugs expressed jubilation. Duterte, who was flown to The Hague on Tuesday night to face charges of crimes against humanity in relations to anti-drug crackdowns, is the first former, this is always the first former Asian leader to be served an arrest warrant filed by the ICC. Activists say as many as 30,000 people were killed in the war on drugs. Activists. And then Carlos Conde, a senior researcher at the Asia Division of Human Rights Watch. Well, this is always the Human Rights Watch, the prime leader of the Human Rights Brigade, said the developments were historic, always historic. And that it would be an understatement to say that victims felt ecstatic at his arrest. But again, you go back to the fact, it doesn't matter what the victims think. The only thing that matters is whether this is justice or this is just a lynch mob targeting someone that the great powers or the powerful forces want to see targeted. Because I got to keep remember, Duterte was much disliked by the Obama administration. They were the ones who first started targeting him with all the stories about human rights abuses in his war on drugs. And then he responded by calling Obama a son of a whore. And then, of course, Trump didn't like him because Duterte seemed open to a rapprochement and a détente with China. So he didn't have any friends in the Western world. So this is something that's totally unprecedented in the history of this country, not just in this country, but of Southeast Asia and even Asia. It's all, as I say, unprecedented. Victim spirits are buoyed. They're very, very optimistic that this is something that can move along expeditiously in The Hague. So notice how this Human Rights Brigade flunky doesn't really care whether he gets a fair trial or not. He's just simply, we're just going to move along expeditiously at The Hague. That's all that matters, so that the victims can be buoyed. The victims here in the Philippines have pretty much lost faith in the domestic justice system, which has done so very little in terms of addressing their quest for justice. This is why they pin their hopes on the ICC. But again, you notice how no one's paying attention to the fact that the Philippines is not under the jurisdiction of the ICC. And then Duterte supporters have argued that as the Philippines withdrew from the Rome Statute in 2019, the ICC no longer has jurisdiction. However, the ICC has previously said it retains jurisdiction for alleged crimes that occurred in the country before its withdrawal. But it doesn't matter what the ICC says, because Philippines, after its withdrawal from the Rome Statute, no longer is a party to the Rome Statute and therefore has no interest in what the Rome Statute says. So you can't just simply say, that, oh, well, but the Rome Statute said this, but you're not party to the Rome Statute anymore. And it's a fairly obvious point. And the ICC may claim this, and of course it does claim this. And then the Human Rights Brigade and the media acolytes then repeat this without even using a little bit of common sense that it's gone. You're not the party to the statute. But even if there's an argument about this, even if this can be debated, then that debate should have taken place. And it should have taken place in the domestic courtrooms of the Philippines, where Duterte would have had the opportunity to challenge that arrest warrant. And then the ICC can make its case, and then Duterte's lawyers can make their case. Any extradition process has to go through a very complicated set of legal proceedings. It's a very complicated case. Any extradition proceeding, they usually take several years because anyone who is under extradition has the right to challenge that extradition. And he has absolutely the right that once he has lost his own the jurisdiction of his domestic courts, once he's lost the protection of his own state, then he's in a very dangerous situation. And that's why extradition proceedings have always been lengthy and complicated and many twists and turns. I mean, that's because serious countries are very wary of handing over their nationals to the jurisdiction of others. They can certainly entertain the charges brought by somebody else, and then they can try them in their own courts, but they don't hand them over to someone else. Let's say that countries have been very jealous of their own citizens. They say that basically we have the right to try our people, and if you want to make a case, then show us your evidence, and if we're persuaded by that evidence, then we can put him on trial in our courts. But we don't just hand our people over, and particularly we don't hand over our former presidents. That's again a very basic proceeding, and that's in the case of Milosevic. There is the issue of sovereign immunity. We had the ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court last year, which made something obvious, which we've always known to be obvious, that chief executives of states enjoy sovereign immunity for their official acts, not for their personal acts. If they were caught, with their hands in the till, or if they were caught abusing their help or whatever else, those are personal acts, and they don't enjoy sovereign immunity for that. But for acts that are in their official capacity, and clearly fighting the drug war, whatever you think about drugs and whatever you think about drug wars, whether they're a good idea or not a good idea, they clearly fall within the realm of official acts. He didn't do this in order to line his pockets. He didn't do this in order to have a better, more comfortable life. He did it because he thought this was what Philippines needed, and this is what the Filipinos had voted for when they had elected him. And everything that he did in pursuing this his war on drugs, he did with a view to helping the people of the Philippines, and he was very popular. No one can dispute. You can read all the news reports today, and you'll see that the journalists acknowledge he was actually very popular in the Philippines. They liked his drug war. When he left office in 2022, so quite recently, he enjoyed enormous public support. So much so that the current president, Marcos, the son of Ferdinand Marcos, the longtime dictator of the Philippines, so the one who actually handed him over, but so much so that Marcos had asked Duterte to stay on as drug czar. So that's how terrible his war on drugs was, that the current president, President Marcos, asked him to stay on as his drug czar. He wanted him to continue this war on drugs. And again, whatever you think about wars on drugs, and I know that a number of gagglers are libertarians, and that's fine. There's a legitimate debate to be had about the usefulness of wars on drugs. But that's the way the Philippines wanted it. The Philippines wanted to wage this war on drugs. They wanted the scourge of drugs removed from the country. They wanted the drug lords removed, and they supported Duterte in doing this. Clearly, they fall within his official act, and he enjoys sovereign immunity. Where the excesses are committed, probably. It was quite a nasty war, but clearly this was what the voters wanted from him. And so, again, there is such a thing as sovereign immunity. And again, these ICC and these international tribunals want to suggest that there's no such thing as a sovereign immunity, that the ICC, this organization that has no legal standing, no international standing, it stands above international rulers, particularly rulers who are themselves accountable to electorates. They were voted into power. They carried out the wishes of their voters. And yet the ICC, which, as I say, has no legal standing, thinks that it stands above popularly elected leaders. Leaders who carry out popular mandates. It's somehow the ICC has it because it somehow, comes up with some legal mumbo jumbo, invents law as it goes along. It is above political leaders. What kind of nonsense is that? Anyway, and then here we have the BBC, which rejoice that he's already in the Hague. And then it says Duterte, who contested his extradition, led the Philippines from 2016 to 2022 and presided over the violent war on drugs that saw thousands of small-time drug dealers and users and killed without trial. May or may not have happened, but it's it's one of those things that it is up to the people of the Philippines to make their decision. I think that they like what he did, and even if they didn't even if they thought that he committed excesses, then he still enjoyed sovereign immunity. He did what he saw as in the interest of his people, and the reason why we have sovereign immunity is that if you didn't, then no leader would ever do anything for fear of prosecution by his successor. Obviously, this is exactly what happened in the United States with Trump, and the Supreme Court rightly said, no, he enjoys sovereign immunity. But in any case, even if he doesn't, even if the Philippines said, no, we thought that this was really terrible what he did, and we think that there should be some kind of a reckoning, whatever that means, then that should be done in the courts of the Philippines, and therefore you will be tried by your peers. Though I don't know how a president can be tried by his peers, because he's being tried by people who weren't president. So Human Rights Brigade were coming up with this nonsense that they're mouthing these cliches about human rights, inventing the law and jurisprudence as they go along, are placing themselves above democratically elected leaders and leaders who are accountable to their voters. Or even if they're not democrats, they're still leaders who are accountable to the people that they lead. So clearly, this is an outrageous act, manifestly unfair on a personal level. A 79-year-old man is now thousands of miles away from home, family, friends, and everything, and he can be in custody for years and years before the trial comes along. It's going to take a long time to prepare a trial. Any of these trials, they're long, complicated cases. It's going to take years and years. He could well die before the prosecution will be ready to present its case. So once again, another total failure for the ICC. But what I want to just say, and it's important to say, don't fall for the nonsense that, oh, I like the ICC when it goes after the people that I don't like Bibi Netanyahu. So that's great. Let's rejoice about that. No, the ICC is an absolute a disaster. It has nothing to do with the law, has nothing to do with legality, nothing to do with international relations, nothing to do with jurisprudence. It's just a mechanism for the Human Rights Brigade and for the kind of the states who use this kind of fake human rights rhetoric to go after their adversaries. Anyway, this is my short podcast on the arrest and abduction of President Duterte. Thank you for listening, and remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.